Welcome to The Thriving Marriage, the podcast for those who want to get their spouse back in love with them and truly thrive.
You'll learn why 95% of people don't save their marriage and the secret method no one else is talking about that will change everything for you. Are you ready? Let's turn tragedy to triumph.
Here are your hosts, international marriage experts, Mark Johnston and Heather Choate.
Welcome everyone here to the Thriving Marriage Podcast. We are live. Good morning, Mark. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. Still sleep deprived with the 8-month-old teething, but we are getting through it. All right, awesome. So welcome everyone to our Thriving Marriage Podcast. Today we're going to be talking about how to overcome unhealthy codependency issues that may be going on in your marriage. So, a couple questions. Do you feel like you've fallen into some codependency challenges? How do you know if you have or not? And then what are the best first steps to take if you find that you are in an unhealthy codependent situation? So, going to be pretty cool. But before we get to that, I'm going to share with you our client win of the week. And this comes from Tabitha with permission. And she says, I have to say that even though this long and rough road can seem daunting at times and feel like rock bottom, if you put the work in and be as positive as possible, given the circumstances and how you react to them, it is very possible to turn things around. I have been through the ringer this last year between trying to control everything and mothering my husband when I should have been his lover and wife, to separating for 3.5 months, to him coming back and us slowly fixing our issues. I can finally honestly say that even though it was the hardest thing I've ever gone through, we are finally getting back to our playful, loving way of being us. And that, my friends, is why we are all here. None of us are perfect. And to be honest, we fell in love with each other and all our imperfections. So no matter where you are in this process and whether you have a lot of money or not, it doesn't matter, because Heather Choate and Mark Johnston have put together a ton of great self-help podcasts, etc. that work. It's up to you to stay stuck or not. My final thought on all this is this: kill them with kindness and remember to treat them as you want them to treat you. Soak up all the info you can and run with it. You have nothing to lose and everything to gain. So congratulations, Tabitha. I'm so happy that you are working on this and turning things around, that you're applying things, that you're taking this information and putting it into action. Because as we say here at High Thrive Coaching, it's not just about information, it's about transformation. And you are a living example of that. So thank you for that. Mark, let's talk now about codependency. All right, so we kind of have a theme with all of our podcasts, especially if you've been listening for a while. I believe we're on like episode 64, right? We always want to get clarity about what we're talking about first and help you kind of identify if this may be something going on in your marriage. So, Mark, what really is codependency? I'll be honest, I've heard this word a lot, like the last 5 years. I feel like it's one of those buzz phrase things, and I didn't know really what it was. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about what it really is. So what is unhealthy codependency?
Yeah, so you're right. Like there's certain phrases or certain terms that get thrown around, maybe appropriately, maybe inappropriately. Like we, in our, even within our own audience, I'll see quite frequently claims that there's narcissism within the relationship, or they might use big word. They might use really charged words like this is an abusive situation. And I don't want to discount actually abusive situations or actual relationships where there's narcissism involved. But, a lot of times these labels are applied in situations that don't quite match. So this is why we always start off like this, really defining things. So codependency specifically, it describes a relationship where each party in the relationship is unable to act independently of the other. Now, this can go all the way to like an extreme where for instance, someone is hardly able to make decisions on their own, but it can manifest in a lot of different ways. Sometimes this is called a relationship addiction and can be just as destructive as a substance addiction. In fact, actually, I believe, when we're talking about the history of this sort of term, it actually came about from relationships dealing with alcoholism and substance abuse or substance addiction. It was first studied in the spouses of those people who were addicted to alcohol or other drugs, and it tended to describe this situation where these spouses, a husband or wife, would enable the addiction, or they would, or they're right outside my door. It sounds like my young kids. I don't know if you all, but we're a situation where they would just do anything that they had to keep the peace, and would typically demonstrate behaviors that would push down their own needs in order to just keep the peace. And this is what codependency is, more or less.
Okay, I did not know the history there of where that came from. So that's pretty fascinating. So what tends to create these codependent situations? Where do they really come from?
Well, it's not always just from poor marriage relationships or close relationships like that. A lot of times this is seen, it's passed down from parent to child. It's not necessarily genetic. This is much more of a behavioral thing. It tends to happen where children observe how their parents navigate their own relationships, where they then start to imitate or emulate those sort of behaviors. So if you, as an example, if you have, once again, an alcoholic spouse who might verbally or physically abuse their partner, who then in turn, instead of fighting back or say leaving, they might placate and they might do what they need to, they might give up their own needs to soothe the abusive partner. And so what ends up happening is the children observe this and they start to learn, okay, if I want peace in my relationships or in my life, I have to sacrifice my own needs. And they see this over and over and over again. And this is how they start to navigate their relationships, where they're so averse to arguments, disagreements, or they're so that they just do anything to avoid it, and to the point where they'll just please the other person and not think about themselves.
Yep. All right. So we've got the example there of alcoholism. I've seen this happen, and I know you have too, in other situations. I've personally seen the effects of a very critical spouse, and no one wanted to, quote unquote, rock the boat, because if you ever brought anything up, it would just end up in another atom bomb has just been dropped. And so everyone in the family would kind of tiptoe around the issue of this highly critical person, and always do what they could to kind of placate them, placate them, whatever the word is. I'm not sure what the right term is there. Right. But
yeah, I think it's placate, isn't it? Or is it? Okay. Maybe I've been saying it wrong for years. It's entirely possible. I've known myself to do that with other words.
Right. So what are some other examples here? Because I've seen this happen, right? Where you don't want to cause problems. So everyone just kind of ignores the bigger issue because they don't want to make it worse. And so then everyone kind of, and the whole family, it wasn't just even the spouse, but it was definitely the spouse, would just kind of try to soothe them and try to, contain the Kraken in this situation, right?
And it's not always just, it's not always about that. But you remind me of even a client that I had spoken with recently, whose spouse was doing a lot of terrible things, and this person just kept over and over again saying, "Okay, well, poor my husband. They might be cheating on me and they might be disrespecting me, but everyone around me is saying, "Oh, I should just give him another chance." And he's coming by and he doesn't know how to cook for himself, so I should probably cook for him, even though he just telling me he came from his affair partner's place and all this. And this is a codependent situation. But anyways, it's not always going to be quite so obvious as that, like you're saying. So maybe some less severe examples of this. And I don't want to say if you have any of these, this is a terrible, terrible situation, or that you're absolutely codependent. You just might need to examine this. But if you are having difficulty making decisions on your own, and that's not it just by itself, what we would be really looking for. In other words, like, you have to check in with your spouse before making important decisions, primarily because you don't want to perhaps upset them, or you feel like they might disapprove, or they might, or you just feel, there could be a lot of reasons there. But even I myself will sometimes find myself doing this just because I don't, always, I don't always like making decisions. But sometimes on certain key areas, I'll even find myself thinking, okay, well, I don't want to say anything here because I know my wife Jen will be unhappy with this. Now, I'm going to point out this is not a codependent situation because there's not a lot of other factors going on in here, and I'm going to talk about how we compare unhealthy codependent situations to healthy interdependent relationships. But anyways, difficulty making decisions. If you are unable to communicate how you feel, either it's because you fear that it'll upset the other person, it'll make them sad, or they don't know how to handle it, or but you're basically pushing down your own feelings. You can't communicate your own feelings. If you're seeking out approval of your partner at the cost of your own personal needs or values, such as you really value being for instance, a good mother or a good father, and your spouse is encouraging you to do something that might work against that, to focus in on them or something. Once again, I always have to point out there's you might feel like it's this situation, and like where your partners ask you to do things, it might not necessarily be codependency. If you are constantly afraid of being abandoned or unwanted or discarded or not good enough, such that you can't bring up your own needs, you can't speak up for yourself for fear of being abandoned or unwanted or discarded, or if you have a really hard time setting personal boundaries. These are all, this is not the clear-cut abusive situation, and a lot of this might be your own feelings, and it might be your own insecurities with bringing up your own needs. It might not even be your partner's fault that you don't feel like you can set boundaries, or that you can make your own decisions, or that you can't communicate how you feel. I want to point that out. The other side of that, because this is more the meek side, the side that where you're going to give up your needs. The other side of that is also codependent, where if you are the one more in a controlling position, if you are exhibiting like a lot of jealousy, where you're getting upset if your spouse has interactions with other people, or you're worried about what they might be wearing because they might attract other people, or you're worried about who they might be talking to, perhaps even at work when you're not around. If you feel like you need to influence or control where your partner goes, or who they talk to, or what they talk about. A practical example of this, my wife and I, we have a friend who, her and her husband are going through a divorce, but she felt like he could go out and do what he wanted, but if she wanted to go out with friends, he'd get really upset, and he would say she's abandoning their children, and things like that. It might seem in an odd way logical, saying, okay, you can't go out, you need to be here with your children. But it's really, in my opinion, he was insecure about his wife going out and seeing people. And Other parts of this, other symptoms, if there's difficulty in admitting being wrong or having made a mistake, or difficulty in respecting others' boundaries. We see this a lot with our clients, that last one, where a partner said, I need space. I need to step away from you. I need to have a little bit of time away. And they keep hounding them, and they keep calling them, and they keep texting them and saying, you need to come back. You need to work on this. Once again, that by itself might not be a codependent situation, but we want to examine it if some of these symptoms are present.
Thank you. That's awesome. So I hope this has given some clarity to those listening, and maybe you're resonating with a few of these things. Let's get a little more clarity, though, Mark, if we can, on how to really identify if codependency is happening in your marriage.
So I give like a lot of just, kind of listing off symptoms, but really it comes down to a few basic principles. This is the important piece right here. We might say, okay, well, my partner has been jealous. That's not necessarily a codependent situation. The principles here are, is there a limited freedom of choice? Like, choices are not respected, and there's inability to have those choices. Is there an intolerance of individual differences, preferences, interests, or choices? Like in the example of our friends who were going through a divorce, there was that intolerance. The wife wanted to have her own hobbies or interests and couldn't do that. Being overly affected or worried about the emotions of their partner, where you're saying, okay, I have to push down my own needs. I'm concerned about how they might feel. If there's a need for control or to be controlled, and yes, it can go in that other direction where, this I think is a very unhealthy situation where you need to be controlled. Other people need to make the decisions for you. Or if there's an inability or an unwillingness to evaluate the relationship and give feedback. And so we can look at this, the converse of this. We're saying, okay, here's the unhealthy situation. Here's the healthy situation. It would be the converse of all these. Is there an ability for people to make independent choices within the relationship? Is there a celebration of differences and an appreciation of differences in preferences and choices and interests? Is there, is there worry about the other person's concerns, but not so much, you're giving support, but not pushing down your own needs? Is there instead of a need for control, do you have a lot of appreciation for the other person's choices? Or do you have an ability to be very open about your feelings and have constructive feedback and an open discussion? These are the unhealthy situations versus the healthy situations. And that's really, it's these principles that are important in this, in evaluating this.
And we're calling the healthy situation interdependence.
Yes,
correct?
interdependence.
Yeah. So healthy situation is the interdependence. So, yes. Mark, how have you seen this kind of play out in your marriage? Can you give us an example of, anyone you had codependency? And if not, then how do you have a healthy interdependence?
Well, I think Jen and I, over the years, we've especially as we've studied more and we've focused more on personal growth, we've been much more aware about these healthier sides. And I know in earlier years, it was difficult for us to share everything, to be very open and to be very, very vulnerable. It wasn't because the marriage itself wasn't necessarily poor. I think that for Jen and I, we just had not learned a lot of the skills or, had a lot of the self-growth. So like I said, myself, earlier in our marriage, in my marriage with Jen, I do admit that I had hesitancy about sharing things with her all the time. I worried that she wouldn't accept me or that she wouldn't understand. But, time and time again, Jen has proven that I can be very open with her and she will support me. And this is what has been really nice. What I really appreciate about my marriage with her is that we have a lot of those healthier sides, that interdependence, such that if Jen wants to go to, some sort of, I think she went to like a knitting group one time just with her friends, that's perfectly fine. I mean, it's not like she does knitting all the time, but, that was just a few times. She did that for a few months, or going to some sort of personal growth and development thing. She went there with my sister and stayed for a weekend while I took care of the kids. Perfectly fine. She can have her own interests, I can have mine, and we support each other in that. And this is what really makes for a happy, fulfilling relationship. How about you, Heather? What about you? I mean, we've kind of gone through a lot of unhealthy symptoms and a lot of healthy symptoms. How is this applied in your marriage?
Right. And so here on the podcast, if you've listened before, I've shared really openly about some of our challenges and my personal challenges with feeling not good enough, feeling like the people I love are going to leave me because I'm somehow lacking. If I don't measure up to the perfect wife, the perfect, mother, and all these expectations, then I wasn't going to be good enough. And so Ben was going to leave me. And so I definitely felt like I've been on kind of both ends of the spectrum of not wanting to rock the boat, wanting to please, not wanting to make him upset. But then also I've stepped into the controlling role out of fear, right? And sometimes the time that he would spend with his family was very threatening to me, all stemmed from that insecurity. And so when you're going through that kind of initial questions there, or initial, symptoms, or, these different aspects of an unhealthy codependency, you said it isn't always your partner that has caused these things to come about. These are things that I brought with me into the marriage from my childhood, right? And so we often see that those limiting beliefs are created really early, and they carry on until you uncover what's going on there and remove those limiting beliefs. So for me, it was, I don't want you to spend that much time with your family and trying to control some of those things that made me very insecure, and kind of brought those up. And now, having come through the other side of that, working on those limiting beliefs myself, now the interdependence is such a strength and a fulfillment to our marriage, because we're able to then both express our needs and respect our needs and work together as a team to get our needs met. Just a very small example, but this weekend, my parents came to visit, and we only see them several times a year. And my husband was feeling a lot of pressure to give a talk at church on Sunday. He'd been assigned to give a talk, and so he was feeling like Saturday, I need to spend a lot of, in my opinion, a lot of time preparing the talk. He wanted, to spend at least several hours on a 10-minute talk, which that's what his need was. And I was trying to feel like I really want to go and spend time with my family. I want to spend time with my parents. And so understanding where each of us were coming from and being able to respect that, we came to, a happy medium of, okay, we'll go do this and this and this with the family. But then at the evening time, I'll take care of the kids so you can focus on preparing your talk. In the past, it would have been like a clash of wills, and neither of us would have ended up very happy at all. And I know it's a small example, but this is just something that we deal with every day, right? Are we going to understand each other's perspective? If we go back to the PATH method, right? Understand each other's perspective, and even give empathy to what the other person's going through. Then that helps us to see it from their side. And then they in turn will have a desire to see it from our side, and we can both work together to get our needs met. So to me, that gives incredible fulfillment in our marriage.
Now I want to ask you, Heather, and I'm not intending here to point fingers somewhere, but where do you think this came from? Was this, because I know for me, I was, in my early years, I was fairly insecure about myself. I remember up until say late high school and into college, I didn't have a lot of self-worth. And this is where I think a lot of my hesitancy to be open or share things in my marriage came from. But this, what I'm pointing out here, it wasn't necessarily in my family environment where I picked up a lot of this. This was just specifically my own weird way of interpreting my social relationships, that people didn't want to talk to me, or that I wasn't popular. And this is, I got over a lot of that in, like I said, in later high school. But where do you think, you were describing a big struggle in your life. Where do you think that came from? Is there, yeah. Where do you?
Sorry, kind of cut out, but yeah, I think I
Where
understand.
did that come from? Where do you think that came from in your life?
Right. So there are things that we just pick up. Sometimes I would belittle myself or look down on myself for having this belief because I didn't go through severe trauma. I didn't go through incredible abuse or anything like that. But they're just things that we tend to pick up from childhood on. I mean, it could have been that we worked really hard on a project when we were like 4 or 5 years old and we wanted validation from our parents and they were dismissive. And we thought, oh man, if I don't measure up, then I'm not good enough. Or they really praise your sibling. Like my sister was just, a bright light and I wasn't as good as her, because I wasn't getting as much attention, in my opinion. In the child brain, we just pick up on these different things. And I think that, okay, if I don't do this, this, and this, then I'm not going to get as much love. So I need to make sure I do this, this, and this, and this, or I'm just not good enough, right? And over the years, these limiting beliefs, they're actually neural pathways in our brain. They become strengthened and we give evidence to that internal story that this is true about me. And we start to see the world through that lens. And even if the exact opposite evidence is in front of us, we'll dismiss it because it doesn't fit our story. So we have to learn that that's just the pathway that our brain's gone down so many times that it's what it's used to. And then we can create a new pathway, one that actually serves us better.
Sorry.
Yeah, that was the root of what happened. And then when some traumas did happen in my family and I saw that, people could leave you, they could hurt you, they could cheat on you, they could do these things, then that was like, boom, solidified that story for me, like really strong. So then I brought that into my marriage and then had to understand that story was not the truth of who I really am.
Yeah. So the reason why I asked this and wanted to point this out was I want to avoid any sort of finger pointing. Even if there's been some big events in your life, it doesn't really help to say, well, this is because my parents were terrible to me, or this is because, my husband has been controlling or whatnot. I like to get away from finger pointing and just really put the focus more on yourself. If you're trying to help and improve yourself, it's so much better, so much healthier to say, okay, well, this is just where I'm at, and this is what my life is like, and this is what my thoughts are like. How do I want to move on from here? It's so much healthier than saying, okay, well, my husband's to blame for this, and they have to fix it, or something along those lines.
Right. Putting yourself in the victim mode is always going to disempower you and keep you stuck. It's only going to keep that story going more. So when we say, this thing happened to me, and now I've interpreted this way, but I have control over how I interpret it. It's not about what happens to me. It's what I choose to do about it.
Yeah, this is a common concept in psychology. It's where what's called your locus of control is. Where do you feel like the control is in your life? Do you have an internal locus of control? In other words, that you feel you have control over your own actions, your own thoughts, your own beliefs, your own life, or do you have an external locus of control? Other people affect you, and other people have a lot of influence over your circumstances in life. And generally, actually, I would say universally, it's seen as healthier to have a stronger internal locus of control. And this is just kind of where we're talking about this right here. So Heather, not to pat ourselves on the back, but, I think both you and Ben and myself and Jen, we have pretty healthy marriages, right? So how have you fostered a healthy amount of interdependence between you and Ben?
Right. So for me, it was really working on that kind of internal insecurity, right? And removing those limiting beliefs. I realized that was the root of what was causing a lot of chaos in my marriage and in my life. And so healing that myself was fundamental to getting to a good place where then I could, not put that kind of pressure and strain on both of us. And that let go of a lot of that fear, of that insecurity of he's going to leave me, or I'm not good enough, that need to control or that need to please. So once we healed those things and then really seeing each other for who we are, who we really are, and recognizing that we are very different And like you said, like an interdependent relationship, you can even celebrate those differences. I can celebrate his need for security, and he can celebrate my need for growth. And instead of letting them just clash against each other on an almost daily basis, we can understand each other and then seek to get both of those needs met. And it's incredibly fulfilling to say, okay, here's how we meet your need for security, and here's how we meet my need for growth. And it's a beautiful thing to see how that works together. And completely over there, and we just kind of live together. It's not like that at all. It's a beautiful, just understanding, compassion, and connection that we have. It's not always perfect, right? That's why we have these principles that help us get through different challenges. And yeah.
I do think that you use the word there, that you celebrate each other's differences. And I think this is really where a couple can get to a really healthy, fulfilling sort of position. As an example, for me, logically, I can see that, okay, family photos are important. My wife, about a month ago, got really excited about getting family photos, but it wasn't really registering on my radar. It's not a priority for me. It's not, I was like, oh, we did a big family photo shoot last year, so not a big deal. But, in this situation, Jen, she brought up the desire to get some more family photos, and I could have just been really dismissive, like, hey, we got these last year, we did a big deal. Instead, I sat with her and I looked through, different photographers and whatnot, and we were talking about different locations that I was supporting her and an interest of hers. And this is what this interdependence is all about, is that she can have something that I don't think is really all that important. This sounds like I'm this heartless sort of person who doesn't care about my family because we don't need photos. But, she can have something that she's really excited about, and I'm like, well, it doesn't really even register for me. And because I'm supporting her in those interests, Jen, I know Jen. She's going to, and it's not even why I do this, but I know that she's going to return the favor. She's going to support me in my own interests. And this is where the interdependence comes in. I actually love seeing how excited she got, and how pleased she was after the fact, and how she then, once we got the photos back, she, you can see some of them there. I have them now framed behind me, and she got really excited about, setting up the background here in my office with some of the family photos. And it was really just great seeing her happy in her own interests. And this is what that interdependence looks like versus codependence.
Yeah. So Go for it.
All right. So I thought I could sum this up in maybe like a case study, a description of what has happened with one of our clients. And then I think we might want to get into some first steps. So I can think of specifically one client who did have a husband who had cheated on her repeatedly. Just many. I'm having a struggle remembering how many affairs that there had been. I know it was more than 3 or 4, but inevitably this husband would come, after some months or so, would come back and be like, what? You're always going to be there for me. I know, even if, these other relationships don't work out, I know you're going to be there for me. Basically, there was a lack of respect. And this is where the codependence came in, is that she would say to herself, shouldn't I take my husband back? Isn't this what a marriage is about? And I would ask her whether it hurts. She said, well, of course it hurts. It's very painful. But if I bring it up to him, he's just going to get upset. Okay, we see some symptoms here, that she had an inability to discuss her feelings, and she had very poor boundaries for herself, and that her husband really didn't respect any sort of boundaries in the relationship himself. So it was part him crossing over those boundaries and this was another thing, expecting her when he was around to have dinner on the table at a certain time, and didn't want her going out to be with other people because he needed her at home. So we have some of the controlling factors, and we have some of those more dependent factors, the pushing down your feelings and those meek factors. And this was a struggle, but where this relationship needed to go, if it was going to be healthy at all, it needed that injection of respect. And so generally where our program goes with a lot of this is really pushing hard on setting healthy boundaries, offering some, having some understanding, trying to work towards compromise, but ultimately if that doesn't work, making sure that your needs are met even without the support of your spouse. What this meant was that her husband was no longer welcome back in the marital home. So legally, I can't remember the exact circumstances. Legally, she was allowed to do this, to change the locks. He was really upset at first, but when so he tried he tried begging and pleading to let him back. So this was once again this kind of test here where he was upset and he wanted to give in, and I told her she had to stick to her guns. And anyways, she set appropriate boundaries, and he did leave for a while. Eventually he did come back though, and because she set appropriate boundaries for him coming back, he agreed to attend therapy. It's because she stood up for herself, she shared how she felt, because she set appropriate boundaries, that she was able to break this cycle. So what do we do? Here's a good example. I always like to break it down into basic ideas and basic principles. So let's see. The basic principles here, if you are trying to get out of a codependent relationship, is that you should focus on yourself some. Especially if you're deep in a codependent relationship, I'm going to say that you need to be a little bit selfish for a bit, because so often people who have been in these situations push their feelings down. And I'm going to apply this same rule to the people who have been controlling, except they're going to focus on themselves without including anyone else in their life. They're going to take care of their own needs. They're going to take care of their own worries, and they're not going to ask other people to take care of those things for them. Which means if you are insecure about your relationship and you need your spouse to be there for you, I'm not saying be selfish and demand that more. I'm saying you need to take care of yourself and your own needs, your own insecurities, without involving the other person. I think you need to manage your stress. A lot of times these codependent quirks come out when stress is high. So if you're not getting enough sleep, if you're overworked, you need to manage that. You do need to stick to your guns, as in no matter what. People fall into these patterns like the example that I gave, and they're very likely, as soon as they hit any resistance, to fall back on those old patterns. You cannot do that. You have to stick some to your healthy boundaries. If you're not sure how to set those healthy boundaries, that's what we're here for. And then you need to let go of control in your life. If you're worried about where your husband or wife is going, if you're worried about who they're talking to, if you're worried about what they might be doing, to get around a codependent relationship, you have to just let all that go. There might be unhealthy things going on. Your spouse might be cheating, but to get around the codependency, this might sound odd. You kind of have to let that go. And this is what there's some shades of a lot of this and a lot of the clients that we talk to, but these would be the basic principles here.
Awesome. So those principles, okay, might be hard to swallow because your entire cycle and your entire instinct is to cling harder or control more or please more, right? Because of that internal drive there for security. And so when we say you got to find your own security, kind of feels like taking away a security blanket, right? And they're not the easiest things to do on your own. And so encourage you, if you're wanting more help with this, to please reach out to Mark or I here on Facebook. You can personally message us, or you can apply for a free call with us. And you can do that at highthrivecoaching.com/apply. For me, uncovering and understanding my own limiting beliefs and what was causing all my fear and insecurity was something I could not do on my own. We're so in our own head. We're so in our own life. We don't see these patterns and these cycles clearly. We just know that we're not happy. And so it does sometimes take the outside perspective of an expert that knows how to diagnose this situation, how to uncover what's really going on there, and then to give us the tools and support to learn how to do it a new and better way, how to emotionally process things, how to let go of what we feel like is our security blanket and find true inner security and true inner empowerment. So if you're needing more help with that, I encourage you to reach out. There is help and you're not alone. All right, now let's go to our marriage mythbuster, Mark. Okay. Marriage mythbuster today is that jealousy can be part of a healthy relationship. It's a healthy relationship.
I think, this might sound odd, but I do actually hear this. People who are in very healthy situations, they'd be like, oh, no, of course that's false. Jealousy isn't really all that healthy, but like I said, I do hear it quite a bit. You'll hear it in the situations where, maybe as a fix to a situation, you say, oh, maybe if I make him jealous, then he'll want me more. So I've actually had several clients in this very scenario where they received advice. They say, you need to make your husband jealous and then he'll pursue you more. And what ended up happening is that backfired. Oh, yeah. and I'm thinking, well, no, duh. Of course, this is going to backfire on you. But the myth is out there enough so that these people consider this a viable option. Where this comes from is this idea that, okay, if my husband or my wife is jealous, that really puts them into overdrive about wanting me. That it indicates that they have a strong desire for me, that they really want this relationship. After all, if they weren't jealous, if they didn't want me, they wouldn't act jealous. It's kind of this unhealthy thing, like this unhealthy behavior indicates love. Mm-hmm. And like I said, maybe not everyone believes this way, but I've heard it often enough. And really where this is, what this is about is if you were starting to try to implement jealousy to try to fix situations or as an indicator of love, you're playing mind games. And the truth is that these mind games never, in the long run, never really turn out they never really end up in a healthy place. I chose this specific myth because it does relate to this codependency topic, because this is how people get into these patterns. They say, okay, I'm incredibly jealous about you going to work and dressing in a certain way, and I don't want the other men to look at you. You might say, someone might say to their wife, and they say, I'm only doing this because I love you. But so if we really want to get around this, it's much what we talked about today. That sort of insecurity that jealousy comes from needs to be addressed more directly. If you're in the position where you're saying, I need to make my spouse jealous, once again, I believe that you are probably in a very insecure position and you need to address that insecurity directly. Much more so than skirting around the issue and trying to manipulate or influence your spouse into being jealous and wanting you. That's just, like I said, I've seen enough scenarios where that sort of tactic backfires, and it's because it's founded on a really unhealthy, distorted principle. So don't use jealousy as a tactic to fix things. It's a garbage tactic. It's absolute garbage. Don't do it. And that's all I say about it.
That insecurity will only breed more insecurity. Now,
Exactly.
not only are you feeling insecure, but now your spouse will feel insecure, and it's just going to totally backfire. So awesome, really
it's
good.
these scenarios that that tend to feed on themselves. Exactly what you're saying. Their insecurity feeds your insecurity, which is going to feed their insecurity, and these are the scenarios that spiral and feed in on themselves, and just will continue to get worse over time.
Very destructive. Yeah. Right. So work on your internal security system. That's what's going to give you the strength and empowerment that you need to have a healthy relationship. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Mark. So next week, we're going to share with you our beginner's guide to build emotional connection, even if they want out. Okay. Sometimes we go super deep into a specific thing like we did today with codependency. Now we're going to pull it back a little bit and give you some really clear steps, the beginner's guide to build that emotional connection, even if they want out. So thank you, Mark. And thank you, everyone. We will talk to you soon.
See you, everyone.
Thanks for listening to The Thriving Marriage, your A to Z blueprint for not just surviving marriage, but thriving. Until next time, my friends, thrive on.